I was working at a small cafe in Paris near the Eiffel Tower when an American couple came in, clearly tourists. The wife asked me, "Excuse me, which metro line takes us to the real Eiffel Tower?" I thought she meant the viewing platform, so I said, "Madam, this is the Eiffel Tower. You're right beneath it." She frowned and said, "No, this one's clearly the replica. The real one's in Las Vegas. We've seen it. It's taller, cleaner, and has that nice casino under it." Her husband nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and they even light it up properly at night. This one's kind of dull." I tried to explain that the Las Vegas version is modeled after the Paris original. She cut me off and said, "Oh honey, they must have copied our one for tourism. They took pictures and captioned them, at the original Eiffel Tower, Europe version." In college, a classmate once insisted that Australia couldn't possibly exist in the southern hemisphere. When our geography professor tried to explain the concept of the equator and Earth's tilt, she rolled her eyes and said, "No, I've flown there. We didn't go upside down." The professor patiently drew a globe and explained what a hemisphere means. She refused to accept it. "If they're on the bottom, how do they not fall off?" she demanded. Someone whispered, "Gravity," and she immediately snapped, "That's a theory." When the professor mentioned satellites orbiting Earth, she interrupted, "You mean those fake CGI photos NASA posts?" At the end of class, she proudly said, "I don't need to see a globe to know what's real. I've been to the zoo. Kangaroos don't live upside down." While working as a tour guide in London, I had an American tourist interrupt my explanation of the Tower Bridge to say, "Wait, isn't this the one that fell down?" I asked what she meant, and she said, "You know, London Bridge is falling down." The song? So when did they rebuild it here? I explained that the nursery rhyme refers to a different bridge, the actual London Bridge, a plain concrete one upriver. She looked shocked. "So where's the real London Bridge? The one from the song?" Another tourist added helpfully, "Didn't America buy it?" That part was actually true. A businessman had bought and rebuilt it in Arizona decades ago. When I told them, she gasped. "So you're telling me the original London Bridge is in America now? Wow, no wonder ours are better built." She took a picture of Tower Bridge anyway and captioned it, "Standing on the real London Bridge. They moved it back." My cousin from Florida once told me he wanted to drive to Alaska to see the penguins. I said, "You know there aren't penguins in Alaska, right? They live in the southern hemisphere, mostly Antarctica." He looked confused. "Then where do the polar bears live?" "In the Arctic," I said. "So, they're neighbors?" "No," I said. "Opposite sides of the world." He blinked. "Then how do they mate?" I had to sit him down and draw two hemispheres before he finally said, "Well, maybe they migrate when it's cold." Later that week he called and said his GPS didn't show a road into Alaska, through Canada, so he assumed he could just go around. He genuinely thought you could drive from Seattle, straight over the ocean, into Anchorage. At a museum in Berlin, I overheard an American explaining to his teenage son that World War II was when America saved Europe from communism. The guide, visibly pained, gently corrected him, saying, "Actually, it was about defeating Nazi Germany." The man frowned. "Wait, weren't the Nazis the communists?" The guide tried again. "No, sir, they were fascists." The man turned to his son and said, "See, Europeans always complicate things. Communists, fascists, same thing. They're all just people who hate freedom." Then he asked, "So where's the part of the museum about how we rebuilt Berlin?" The guide hesitated. "This is East Berlin. That was the Soviets." He blinked. "You mean Russia owned Germany?" Man, I gotta rewatch Saving Private Ryan. I was a guide in Beijing when an American tourist asked me if the Great Wall connects to the pyramids. I assumed he was joking. He wasn't. He said, "I saw a documentary, Ancient Aliens or something, that said all the ancient wonders were built by the same people. So technically, this wall should lead to Egypt, right?" I tried to explain that China and Egypt are thousands of miles apart. He nodded thoughtfully. "So it's underground then." When I said no, he sighed. "You guys should really dig and check. You might find the rest of it." At the end of the tour, he asked if there was a Starbucks at the other end. My friend's coworker once asked how astronauts don't fall off the International Space Station. He said, they float in orbit. She frowned. Orbit of what? He replied, of the Earth. Her face twisted in disbelief. Then wouldn't they just crash back down eventually? He tried explaining velocity, gravity, centripetal force, the works. She shook her head. Sounds made up. Space is probably flat, like Kansas. Later, she asked if the moon has seasons, and whether astronauts had to adjust their clocks for moon time. During my trip to Ireland, an American tourist asked our local guide, "So when did you guys win independence from America?" The guide laughed, thinking it was a joke. The tourist didn't. "You know," she continued, "like when we had the revolution against the British. I just assumed you guys followed after us." The guide said dryly, "We actually did it before you." The woman frowned, genuinely puzzled. "Wait, what? That's impossible. America invented freedom." The guide just sighed and said, "Yes, ma'am. And we imported some." In a history seminar, a student confidently argued that the French Revolution was inspired by America's Civil War. The professor blinked and said, "Do you mean the American Revolution?" The student shook his head. "No, the one with the North and South. The French saw it on the news and copied it." The professor quietly reminded him that the French Revolution was in the 1700s, before television, before the Civil War. The student leaned back and said, "Well, time zones are tricky. Maybe it was earlier there." A friend's aunt was furious that her new car's GPS didn't list Europe as a drivable destination. She ranted, "It's supposed to be international. I paid for global navigation." The technician told her, "Ma'am, you can't drive to Europe from the US." She crossed her arms. "Why not? There's a bridge to Canada, isn't there? So just keep going east." When he explained the existence of the Atlantic Ocean, she frowned and said, "So you're telling me they expect people to just stop driving halfway?" She left a 1-star review online saying, "Useless GPS. Won't even show Europe." I was leading a group of American tourists in Berlin, standing right in front of the Berlin Wall Memorial. One guy in his 30s asked me, "So this wall, when did America build it?" I blinked. America didn't build the Berlin Wall. It was built by East Germany during the Cold War. He frowned, confused. "Wait, so we weren't protecting democracy here? I thought it was to keep the communists out." I explained, as gently as possible, that it was actually built to keep East Germans from escaping to the West. He looked genuinely hurt and said, "Wow. So we weren't the good guys in this one?" His wife chimed in, "Of course we were. We always are." They took selfies smiling in front of the memorial, captioning them, "Freedom wins." A woman in my class told me she'd been saving for years to visit Paris. We were all excited for her, until she came back a week later and said, "It wasn't as fancy as I thought." The Eiffel Tower looked smaller, and everyone spoke with southern accents. It turns out she had flown to Paris, Texas, because she thought Paris was just Paris. When someone asked her how she didn't notice the difference, she said, "Well, I figured maybe they just moved it to America for tourism. Makes more sense that way." My cousin was watching a documentary about the Great Wall of China. Halfway through, he said, "So is that the wall Trump was trying to finish?" I told him, "No, that's China." He frowned. "Right, but didn't the Mexicans build it first and then China copied it?" He spent the next 20 minutes trying to prove that the Great Wall was just a franchise, like McDonald's, but for countries trying to keep people out. At a school geography bee, one contestant proudly answered that the equator was the line separating the United States from Mexico. When corrected, he doubled down, "No, I've seen maps. It's right there in the middle, Texas and all that." Another kid raised his hand to argue that if the Earth were really round, people in Australia would fall off. The teacher gave up and switched to a multiple-choice quiz about state capitals. Half the class still failed. I once worked with an American who was flying to Toronto in February. He packed shorts and flip-flops. When I warned him that it would be freezing, he laughed. "Canada's just above Michigan. It can't be that cold. Weather doesn't cross borders." He landed, stepped outside the airport, and immediately slipped on ice. When he came back, sunburnt from wind exposure, he said, "They should warn people. That's false advertising, it's called the Great White North, not the Great Freezing North." While touring the Colosseum, an American tourist turned to me and said, "Wow, they really did a great job recreating the Vegas version." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. She was shocked to learn this one was the original. She actually said, "So Vegas came first, right? Then Italy copied it to make it more authentic?" When I told her Rome was thousands of years older, she whispered to her husband, "I think he's making that up to sound smart." My neighbor once tried to mail a package to Washington, D.C. but wrote, "Washington, D.C., Washington," on the label. When I corrected him, he argued, "If it's not in Washington state, why's it called Washington?" I explained that it's a federal district, not a state. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "So it's like Puerto Rico then? Do they even vote?" When I told him no, he said, "Then what's the point of it? They should just move the capital to Texas." A woman in my office once said she didn't believe in the moon. Her reasoning? It's just the sun reflecting off clouds. The government just edits photos to make it round. When we asked her to explain lunar eclipses, she said, "That's just when the clouds take a nap." She also claimed NASA was basically a movie studio. She works in accounting. My coworker was angry because a recipe he found online used grams instead of cups. He threw a fit, yelling, "Why do foreign countries keep making things harder for us? Can't they just use American measurements like everyone else?" I said, "The US is one of the only countries that doesn't use the metric system." He smirked and said, "That's because we won. The winners get to make their own measurements." He later ruined the recipe by confusing milliliters with millimeters. A tourist at Mount Rushmore asked a park ranger, "When are they going to add Obama?" The ranger chuckled politely, saying there were no such plans. The man got annoyed. "That's racist. They add new presidents all the time. My grandpa said they carved Reagan in the 80s. When told that Mount Rushmore hasn't been touched since 1941, he said, "Fake news. I've seen updated pictures online." He then pointed to the mountain and asked, "Which one is Ben Franklin?"